Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Friday edition of the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, sponsored by the Draft Professors. Right now, joined by Draft Professors Ian Cummings, JT Olson. We finished up, like 6 or 7 podcasts, cornerbacks, a couple of weeks ago. But JT, this was your first look at the draft class. What's your overall impression of it right now?
My overall impression is this is a really good and really deep cornerback class. I found myself making my top 20 board, and there are legitimately guys who I got to around 20 and then 21 and 22 and 23. I'm like, okay, these guys could start in the league. These guys, maybe not year one, but year two, year three, these guys are projected as starters. So making this top 20 was really difficult, but I think it's just a testament to how good and how deep this cornerback class is. And, so often it's like ice cream. You pick your favorite flavor. So I think I'm going to have a few names that Ian doesn't have, and he's going to have a few names that I don't have, just because there's so many good options, and it's really just personal preference for a lot of it.
Yeah, Ian, how are you feeling about the cornerback class?
I'm feeling good. I'm also feeling like I still need to cover more ground with this particular class. It's such a, echoing what JT said, it's a very deep group. A lot of talented players who could start on Sunday pretty early in their careers. And, as we'll get into it with my board in particular, there are a few guys that I still need to get updated grades on. And I've already got upwards of 20 in the, day two range, right? So it's a very deep class, very versatile class too. A lot of different player types, a lot of different, guys who can play boundary, who can play nickel, who can play a little bit of both, right? So, I think the ice cream metaphor definitely tracks with this class. And obviously we still have a little bit to go as far as, declarations, right? Willing to bet we'll see at least one or two names that we were expecting, maybe go back, maybe we get a couple surprising declarations ahead of schedule, right? But right away, it's a deep class. It's a class with a lot of variability, a lot of versatility, and guys who can start pretty early on. And, at the NFL level, there are teams that, will draft players a little bit earlier based on their schematic preferences too. So it's going to be really fun to see where these guys end up. But I think the clashing styles allows for a lot of debate, fodder in the lead up to the draft. So we're going to have a fun few months. But right now, really excited to kind of chop it up on the updated top 20 board.
Yeah, so I am in the process of generating the graphics for the podcast. But while I'm doing that, I think that the two of you touched on a couple of things with the corners. So first of all, this is the beginning of December. If you're watching this podcast after we do it live, this is the beginning of December. So any board that is made now is preliminary. Like as Ian said, there's still grades that aren't finalized. But you guys have gone through what you think we went through about 48 corners on the podcast?
Around that, yeah. And like even then, like there's the All-Star circuit that's coming up too. Like I know one guy that I didn't manage to get a grade on yet, but very intrigued. Charles Demings from Stephen F. Austin, right? He accepted an invite to the Senior Bowl. Colin Wright was there too. So like we still, and again, I think anytime you look at the All-Star cycle, the NFL Combine, any of the off-season things, right? You don't want to double count necessarily, right? The film is there, and the film is very important, but they are boxes to check, and they are notable landmarks, checkpoints in the pre-draft process. So still a long way to go, and I think with this class in particular, we've already seen the depth with the grades that we have gotten on the board. I think as we continue to dive into it, we're just going to be more impressed by the amount of depth and talent that's there. So, yeah, we're at a checkpoint here, right? But these are not final boards, like you said. There's still a lot of reevaluation to go. There's still landmarks that we need to hit, checkpoints we need to hit, and other boxes that we need to check off and before we finalize. So, it's a fun part of the process, right? But still a long way to go.
I saw that corner accepted that invite to the Senior Bowl, and my initial thought was, how could there possibly be a corner that's in this class that I haven't watched yet? I feel like we've watched so many, but there are just so many guys out there. We haven't got to Senior Bowl yet, or Shrine Bowl, or any of the bowl games, and we haven't even gotten to championship week yet. Like, I'm going to be watching this Ohio State Indiana Big Ten championship very closely because there are questions with these guys who I want answered just based on the level of competition they go on sometimes. So yeah, there's still a lot of film to be put out there. There's still a lot of questions to be answered, let alone combine, athletic testing, medical testing. So there are still a lot of milestones to check still.
Okay. And I will now unveil the boards here that we are going to be sharing. So is that that's not readable.
If I go full screen, it is.
Okay. So JT's board is on the left. Ian's board is on the right. For those that listen to this on Spotify, I'm going to read the boards. So top 10 for JT, Mansour Delane, Jermod McCoy, Avion Terrell, Keith Abney, Will Lee III, Colton Hood, Julian Neal, Preston Hodge, Hezekiah Masses. Did I say the first name correctly?
I believe it's Hezekiah.
Hezekiah Masses. And then number 10 for JT is Malik Muhammad. So for Ian, Mansour Delane, Jermod McCoy, Keith Abney, Colton Hood, Avion Terrell, D'Angelo Pons, Will Lee III, Xavier Scott of Illinois, Julian Neal, Traden Stukes are the top 10. There's one more slide that has the more players, but we'll get to that group shortly. Ian, as we look at your board from Delane to Stukes, what round do you have Delane graded in, and what round do you have Stukes graded in? Like, how dense is that corner board?
Yeah, so it's pretty dense. I would say Delane is probably you're looking at a potential top 10 pick with him, right? That's the kind of the caliber that we're looking at. And Jermod McCoy as well, if the medicals check out, that's been the biggest question mark with him. But those two guys are close to top 10 caliber, not quite blue chip on my scale, but guys who are easily worthy of early first round capital, right? A guy that I think back to is Devin Witherspoon. He wasn't quite a blue chip grade for me, but I still was a massive fan of him, was a top 12 player on my board, and he ended up going top 10 and becoming a really good player in the NFL, right? So I think those guys is kind of the caliber that they're at. And then you go down to Stukes and Neal and Xavier Scott. Those guys are kind of in the mid day 2 range for me right now. And obviously, Xavier Scott, the medicals are a concern for him, or more of a question mark, right? He's barely played this year. He could take a medical red shirt and return to school if he wanted to, but those are still guys that are really solid pros. You look at Julian Neal, his ability to play the boundary, his ability to play in support with his physicality, with his quickness, and then you look at Stukes with the explosiveness closing downhill, the ability and support, the playmaking, the nickel versatility too. Those are still really solid players. So I'd say the window is top 10 at the very top of my top 10, ironically. And then going down the board, you're looking at more, early to mid day 2. I'd say Stukes is more of a mid day 2 with the age and the medical history, right? But I think he can come in and be a really solid player right out the gate. So that's kind of the window that we're working with there.
Okay. So do you have a top 50 grade on Stukes right now?
Top 50? I don't know about that. Let me scroll over to my big board real quick, and I'm going to unfilter. Stukes he's just outside my top 50 right now, actually. So he's just outside. I'd say more of a top 64 grade. And again, the age, the medical insert, he's a 6th-year senior, so he'll probably be 24 at least as a rookie, right? And he's got some medicals on his record that teams are going to have to check, but he's a really solid player in my opinion. So just outside my top 50, we'll say top 64.
And okay, I have more questions for Ian, but JT, I know that your board consists of a lot of cornerbacks and not a lot of other players right now. Do you have a feel for how high you would take Delane and how high you would take Muhammad based on what evaluations you've done, JT?
So I'd agree. Delane and McCoy, those are probably top 10 to 12 picks right there. I think McCoy is a little more fuzzy because of the injury. We just haven't really seen him this year. But those are guys who I think are going to go in the top 15 picks, and I don't think there's much doubt in my mind at this point. I think those are two, I don't do the round grade, I don't do the blue chip grade, but I'd say those are two very, very good corners right there. And I'd say the next tier is not super far off, but I think those two and maybe Terrell for me are in the top tier. So I think those are slam dunk first round picks, those two especially, and then probably 3 and 4 on my board as well.
Okay. And then how far down, like Muhammad, do you think Muhammad is a top 50 pick is kind of where I was going?
I don't think so. And it'll depend on the class overall. But I'd say I'd probably cut it off at Julian Neal, who I say has a chance to be in my top 50. After that, I think those are probably outside my top 50. I like Hodge. I like Massis. I like Muhammad. I like even a few on my next page and who I think are in a similar tier. But I think guys who are going to go in the first round and a half, I don't think it'll be more than those 7 necessarily for me.
Okay. So there are 6 corners that are unique. So meaning that 7 of the 10 in the top 10 are the same for Ian and JT. There's 3 different on each board. JT's 3 top 10 grades that Ian doesn't have are Preston Hodge, Hezekiah Masses.
There you go.
And Malik Muhammad. And then for Ian, it's D'Angelo Pons, Xavier Scott, and Trayden Stoops. So here's a little question. So D'Angelo Pons plays boundary corner for Indiana. Ian, do you think D'Angelo Pons is going to be a slot or a boundary corner at the NFL level?
I think he'll probably be a boundary, and that comes with a caveat. Obviously, you have to see if the size translates, right? He's undersized for a corner, right? Only 170 pounds, 5'9", right? So he hasn't been tested a ton in that regard this year, right? Indiana, but when he's been tested, he's been terrific this year, honestly, and that's been kind of the quandary for me with D'Angelo Pons. He's definitely a size outlier at the corner position, right? But he's so good in every other category. I was trying to I looked at his grade that I had at least 3 times just today. Just am I sure? Am I good here? Am I missing anything? And to me, the size is really one of the only knocks you can have on him. He ran a 10.4 100-meter dash in high school, and that vertical speed definitely shows up on film. He's explosive. I think he's pretty twitched up. I think he's very fluid for his size too, which, I mean, at that size, naturally, it's a little easier to sync and redirect and rechannel acceleration through transitions, right? And he's got that for sure. I think he's definitely a little more comfortable in off-man and zone, right, where he can manage space and run with guys. But when he does have to play up to his opponent's physicality, he can do that too. He is phenomenal at the catch point as far as, getting his eyes around, timing his extensions and his attacks and making precise plays on the ball. So I think the asterisk with D'Angelo Pons is we haven't seen him. His toughest test of the year is still to play. It actually is coming tomorrow when they play Ohio State, Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith. I mean, if you want to see if an undersized corner like Pons can hold up, this is the game to watch right here, because you've got Carnell Tate, who's a STEM master, right? He can make amazing plays at the catch point. And then Jeremiah Smith too, ditto for him. But, he's an explosive size speed specimen. So, we still haven't, the book is still open on Pons and whether or not he can size up and what issues that'll cause for him at the next level. But with the tape that we've seen thus far, I think there's a decent chance that he could be the outlier who beats the odds, right? I really am a big fan of his technical prowess, his technical variability, right? His ability to play super composed and, under control at the catch point, even against bigger guys. And then the athleticism is not a concern with him either. So that's one that the book is still open. I'm kind of still monitoring that, but tomorrow's game is going to be a big milestone. If he matches up to it, I think there's an argument to make that he's a top 50 player in the class, right? Just off of that. But if there are issues that come about, then maybe you look at reevaluating and moving him down the board a little bit. But, some guys in this class, whether it's technical issues or size, sometimes they'll resort to extraneous physicality to counteract that. I don't think Pons does that nearly as often as you would think. So I'm a really big fan of the player. It's just he's a size outlier. So how do you weigh that? Right now, I'm giving him the credence that he deserves with my grade, but waiting to see how he performs tomorrow.
Yeah. So JT, if D'Angelo Pons was 5'10" and 180 pounds, does he crack your top 10?
I don't know. I'm too much of a coward to pull the trigger on Pons right now. I have to see what he does tomorrow. I'll never be able to say I was in on the ground floor with him, but I really need tomorrow to see how he responds to those bigger, faster, stronger wide receivers, just because you don't see a lot of guys like that in the Big Ten. There are not a lot of NFL wide receivers, and there are now. We've added Oregon, we've added USC to the Big Ten, but you do not see a lot of top tier competition in the Big Ten when it comes to wide receivers. So I really want to see this matchup. This is one that's going to heavily influence my opinion on Pods before I really commit to him, if at all.
Okay. And then JT, you had Preston Hodge from Colorado in your top 10. Is Preston Hodge for you a slot corner?
He is a slot corner, and I think he'll be a rock solid slot corner. I think he does most everything really well, and I think you can plug him, and I don't know that he'll ever be a star, but I think he's a guy you can plug him, and you've got a guy there for the foreseeable future, and you don't have to worry about the position. It's going to be, if not great, it's going to be solid, and I really just like this next tier. I think is a tier of solid starters after you get into 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 on my board. These are guys who I think they have a chance to be, in different ways, very dependable. A guy who can have a long 8 to 10 year career. I feel that's his niche. I think he's really good there. I do, and we'll talk a little bit more about Xavier Scott later. I do think I like Scott better, but we have questions with his health and his injury right now. But I think Hodge is just plug and play. You don't have to worry about him. I think he's going to be a very smooth and natural transition.
Yeah. So on last night's podcast, we were discussing whether or not a slot corner would traditionally be day 2 value. Right? Like we were talking, like we had Trent McDuffie. Some people were saying when he came out, he would be slot. I think he played slot as a rookie, and he's been a boundary his second and third year. But JT has Preston Hodge at 8. And then, Ian, you have Xavier Scott from Illinois at 8. Is Xavier Scott a slot corner for you, Ian?
Yeah, he's a slot. And I think we probably talked about him at some point in a previous pod. But I kind of put him in that bucket where he's a slot. He's a nickel DB for sure, but he can also rotate back and play safety without missing too much of a beat. Because I think his zone IQ, I think his ability to manage positioning is really strong, right? And also, the technical variability. He can pedal. He can use inch resets over top stems in space, and he can redirect really quickly. The plant and drive efficiency is there with him. The vertical athleticism, the long speed might not be quantifiably elite, but you're still looking at a guy with more than enough of a coverage, framework where he's got that coverage mobility. He can match most guys, and he's got the physicality, the willing physicality that you want out of a nickel, and he's got the ability to play the ball that works in both spots. So whenever you have a guy who can play multiple positions, whether it's nickel or safety, I view that as a massive boon, and I don't box them in, right? Because if I get into a situation where maybe an offense motions into a 3-by-1 look or something where you have to bring a safety down into the nickel spot, Xavier Scott is a guy who can do that, and you don't have to worry about it because that's also a natural fit for him, right? But then at the same time, if you get a look where you want to bring another guy deep, Xavier Scott can do that too reliably, right? So I don't box those guys in because it's valuable when they can perform both roles at a high level, and I think he can. But I also think he can be a dang good nickel at the next level. So I would definitely give him a sizable portion of his reps there, just because you're working with the route intelligence. In coverage, he's going to be one of the strongest guys in the class, and he's physical. He's a playmaker at the catch point, and he can play in support too. So checks a lot of the boxes.
Okay, and then Ian, same question, Trayden Stukes. Do you have Stukes as a slot corner, or do you see his NFL path to be different?
I see him as a slot corner too. Now he's a different type of slot corner, right? But I think whenever you have enough willing physicality, right? Energy, urgency coming downhill, right? If you're willing to operate in pursuit off the blitz, I think those are good things for you as a slot corner. And I think he's got those. As far as builds go, I think he's a little bit bigger, a little bit longer than Xavier Scott, and so he's going to be not quite as fluid, but I still think he's very, very fluid for his size. And he's agile, he's twitched up, he's explosive coming downhill. He has played both the slot and the boundary for Arizona. So again, it's kind of one of those things where, if there's a situation where he's shadowing someone and that wide receiver goes out to the boundary, I'm comfortable knowing that Trayden Stukes has the size and speed to match up with him and the ability to use targeted physicality to gather that player, right? At the same time, I do think in the slot, he's very, very good. One of the strongest points of Stukes' game, in my opinion, and he's a sixth-year senior. He's a veteran. He's a captain. So it's not a surprise that this is a strong point of his game, but situational awareness and role responsibility, knowing what is his job on a given snap, knowing what is his teammates' jobs and how he can kind of weave within that, And I think that role responsibility in tandem with the route vision, the spatial awareness, the football IQ, in the slot, you're managing a lot of different pieces, right? On the boundary, you can use the boundary as an extra defender, right? You know that the receiver can't go that far, right? So, in a way, it's more boxed off. It's a little bit easier to manage, I feel like, just one-on-one. Now, obviously, winning one-on-one is its own challenge, right? And that opens a can of worms. But when you're in the slot, you can deal with outbreakers, inbreakers, pick plays, right? So there's so many different things that you have to be aware of. And Stukes' general awareness, to my mind, in my opinion, is a really good foundation for that. So I would probably keep him primarily in the slot, but I know he can play the boundary too, and he'll be a solid player.
Yeah. So JT, as you look at both boards, do you have a question as to either how Ian graded somebody or the difference in your grades on any of the players?
I don't know that I do. I think our big difference here is Pons, but I think when we flip to the next page, I think I have Scott very close to the top of my next page. I think Stukes isn't far after him. I see them both as nickels as well. I definitely think Scott has the best upside of that group of nickels overall because of all the reasons Ian's talked about, how good he can be at safety and nickel. And I really love that prototype of player, that Brian Branch, that Tyke Smith. They can do it all. They're physical. They're good in coverage. You ask them to play nickel, they can do a really good job. You ask them to play safety, they can do a really good job. You just try and get those kind of players on the field. So I definitely get why he's high on Ian's board. He's high on my board too. I just have that injury question that's kind of holding me back from putting him up a little higher where Ian's got him. And I really like Stukes. I think he's got higher upside than Preston Hodge because I really like his fluidity. I really like his speed. He looks incredibly fast. But I think he's an older prospect. I think if I pull up my report, did he have an injury history I'm trying to think of?
I believe he did. I can't remember the exact injury off the top of my head right now, but I know he missed some time. Maybe it was in 2024.
Yeah, so there's a little bit more red flags there with him,
Yeah.
But I think I could definitely see the upside with him and his physical profile and how I think if I check my notes here, I think he was a very smart player, highly intelligent, and he's been playing for, it feels like 7 years in college, so he's got a lot of experience. But I definitely get that process on why Ian has those two guys there, and I think pretty highly of them as well. If I'm looking at them in terms of tiers, I have them all in the same tier as that 7, 8, 9 group or that 8, 9, 10 group on my other page. So I definitely get where he's coming from with those guys, and I don't see them unsimilarly at all.
And real quick too, when a guy's coming off an injury like that, like the first thing that I look for is, did he lose a step, right? Have we lost some juice? And I remember Stukes caught my eye back in like 2023 or something. It was definitely earlier. where his just on attack explosiveness was really strong. Right away, you can tell that, right? Obviously, misses some time with the injury. You want to see, can he come back to 100%? And this year, I don't think he's lost a step at all. I think he looks just as fast flowing to the ball as he did before. And to JT's point too, and kind of what I saw on film when I watched him each time, the reactive quickness is really, really strong. And that's something as a defensive back, when you're managing so many different pieces, just processing it, like your reactive quickness kind of has to be fast. It's kind of non-negotiable. And I think with Stooks is definitely there.
So I flipped to the second page. When Ian shared his grades, Ian, you said that you are confident that your top 19 corners are going to be really close to your top 100 or in your top 100.
They'll be orbiting it for sure, right? There's obviously many different players still that I need to get final grades on at every position pretty much. So I'm still filling out my board a little bit, still updating, but I feel pretty confident, especially like that top, once you get to Preston Hodge and Devin Marshall and even Sicario Davis. I mean, those are all guys that are graded above 80 on my scale right now. And generally above 80 for my scale, you're looking at guys who are, I like to put it as worthy of day two capital in my opinion, right? Because I don't know if they're going to go that high. Some guys inevitably fall, and teams have different opinions on guys, but that's kind of what my skill says. If you're above 80, in my opinion, you're worthy of day two capital. Right on the cusp of 80 is like late day two, fringe day three. But yes, to your point, they're all kind of orbiting that range.
Yep. So a couple things to point out. So Davon Marshall, we did not podcast on. Yep. So that was a name that came to my attention like probably 3 weeks ago. So JT, I will definitely mention you want to watch Davon Marshall from Vanderbilt. His grades are coming back top 100 from I think James Foster.
NC State.
Oh, okay. I have the wrong school there. Thank you.
Oh, see, he just lost draft stock in my book. I'm always rooting for Vanderbilt.
Okay. I will have to flip that in the database. But the corners for JT that are in his top 20, Xavier Scott, Kayan Lee, Tacario Davis, Traydon Stooks, Chris Johnson, Jair Hill, Damani Jackson, Chandler Rivers, Devontae Smith, Davison Igbinosun. For Ian, in his top 19, was Davison Igbinosun, Chris Johnson, Brandon Cisse, Chandler Rivers, Hezekiah Masses, Preston Hodge, Davon Marshall, Tacario Davis, Jermaine Matthews. So this list, there's a lot of different names. So JT, what about Brandon Cisse from South Carolina? Had you not include him in your top 20?
That's a good question. He's one I went back and forth on. That 20th spot, I thought about giving to a couple of different guys. Igbinosun, AJ Harris from Penn State. Is it Cisse? Because in my head, I call him Cease.
I believe it's Cisse. Yep.
Okay. So those are all guys who were in contention for being on that. And I'll say this. Disagreeing with Ian and Dane Brugler on where to rank this guy, it's probably not going to end up good for me. I don't like betting those odds right there. But I can't even say what it is. There's a component when I watch him, and I feel like there's something missing, and I can't put my finger on exactly what it is. Maybe it's a mental thing. Maybe it's a twitch thing. But I feel like every time I watch him, receivers are creating separation when I don't feel like they should. And, maybe it's just bits and pieces from different games, and they just stick with me, and there's something not clicking for me with him. And
I can help you out, because I think one of my biggest issues with him, and you can tell me if this is what you've seen too, or if a lot of those reps are in press, because I feel like his discipline and timing and press is one of his biggest issues right now. In my opinion, I think using if you're a corner playing press, right, the tried and true adage, feet first, right? You have to have a strong foundation before you engage with your arms in your hands. And I feel like Cisse, sometimes can be really uncoordinated there, right? Like he's energetic and twitch, and I like his twitch. I like his explosion. I think his athletic foundation is very strong, and I think he brings the energy and urgency that you want. But when you're disjointed with your attack and press coverage, if you're not effectively matching guys and keeping hip leverage before you engage with your length, then a lot of times guys will either be able to, win with the physicality, or they'll be able to offset you if you open the gate too quick. So I think with Cisse, it's just a lot of either engaging too soon or offsetting too far laterally, opening the gate, allowing guys easy paths to separation. So yeah, I think the spatial discipline and the timing and press, both of those things can improve drastically still. And he's a young player; it's going to happen. But when I was watching him, that was kind of the biggest thing for me. And I think that kind of translates to what you're saying, which is that a player this talented should not give up separation this often. And to me, it's the discipline, the timing, and press that's one of the bigger issues right now.
That could be it. But I know there's been reps where I've watched him when he's off zone, and the receiver at the top of his stem, he cuts, and whether it's a post or an in-breaking route, Cisse, not Cease, but Cisse, he just doesn't react fast enough. And maybe that's just another timing issue, but it also can come across as, is he as twitched up as I think he is issue, because there's no reason he shouldn't be able to time that. I think some of the routes are really basic and predictable, and he should be able to react to them better than what I think he is. And whether that's a mental or a physical, I haven't totally figured out yet. Maybe it's a little of both. Maybe he's a good athlete but not a great athlete, but that could be a part of it. It could just be a timing issue, and having that killer instinct on breaking on it now and getting there as the ball gets there, or stepping with the receiver. So that could be a big part of it. It could just be a mental timing, a natural feel for the game kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Ian, question about Domani Jackson. So if you had to build a cornerback in a lab, how close is Domani Jackson to what you would build in the lab? And then, we were the draft community was high on Domani Jackson last year. And I know from when we covered him on the podcast, he's fallen. But how far off is Domani Jackson from your top 19?
So from my top 19, if Matthews is 19, Domani Jackson is a few spots down, and it might the number of spots might increase a little bit, because a few guys that I didn't have on my updated grade board that I sent you, I still need to update them a little bit more. K.N. Lee from Auburn is one that would probably be over Domani Jackson right now. Jaden Kennedy from Oregon is another one who'd be over him. And then Colin Wright, who also accepted his Senior Bowl invite today, is another guy who would probably be over Domani Jackson right now. So if Jermaine Matthews is 19, Domani Jackson is probably rounding out my top 25 right now. And to your first question, if you could build a corner in a lab, this would be the guy pretty much. I mean, athletically, there's no box he doesn't check. I think he ran a 10:19 or something insanely fast in the 100-meter dash in high school. And that shows up on film. I mean, he can run with anybody. He can match anybody. It's just a matter of discipline with him. That's what it's been for a long time. There were reps at USC, right, where he'd use extraneous physicality or just get a little too chippy and draw a penalty, or just be a little too physical and not technically sound. And I think that really it's tough, because last year, 2024, he had some really good moments on tape, and I thought he showed a ton of development in his first year as a full-time starter at Alabama. And then for whatever reason, it just regressed quite a bit this year, to the point where he has lost a lot of his reps down the stretch to freshman Dejoun Lee, who, to be fair, Dejoun Lee is a really, really good player. We're going to be talking about him in a couple of years, but it's always been discipline with Domani Jackson. He's got the physical potential. He's got upside through the roof as far as being able to match and press man, being able to manage zones and off man and zone coverage, and then running with guys on the vertical plane. But there's still something that hasn't clicked, right? So, and he's a senior, he's a true senior. He doesn't have any eligibility remaining, unfortunately. So he is going to have to hit the draft circuit, and he's going to test off the charts. And so it's going to be a question of, where do we draft this guy? If it were me, seeing the regression that I saw this year and seeing the strength of the corner position in this class, I probably wouldn't take him top 100. I probably wouldn't take him until day 3. On day 3, the opportunity cost is a lot lower, right? So you can take a gamble on a guy like that. You know, get him in an NFL locker room with the NFL coaching staff and see if you can help him reach his peak potential. But we're left with a massive dichotomy of this is the ceiling and then this is the floor. You know, there's a long way to go and a longer way than we were hoping to see coming into the year. But the potential is still there. So someone will take a gamble on it. And I think it's worth gambling on at a certain point. But there is uncertainty there too.
Yep. So JT, I want to point out you have Devontae Smith of Notre Dame at 19, and he was on one of the first podcasts, and I remember that you said you really liked him. And so I post a mock draft to a Bills chat, and I had Devontae Smith at like round 6 or 7, and they're like, no. There was one other draft professor that loved Devontae Smith, and I think the two of you are the president of the Devontae Smith fan club. What do you like about Devontae Smith that you have him in your top 20 right now?
Honestly, I like most everything I see. My only issue with him is I don't see him challenged as much as I would want to really feel confident in investing in him. But when he's going against opponent, he's in good position. I really like where he's at. I think he comes up against the run. I like his build. He moves really well for his size. I think he looks fairly thick. I don't know what his measurables are, but I think he looks like a thicker corner on tape. But he moves well at whatever his listed weight is. He's one who I really want to see in one of these bowl games, whether it's the Senior Bowl or the Shrine Bowl. I want to see him tested against higher level competition because, let's be honest, Notre Dame every year, they have a couple of really cool games against teams like Miami and Texas A&M, and then they play the worst of the worst in other conferences, the Purdue's, the Stanford. So he isn't challenged as much as I would want him to be. But part of that is because he's doing a really good job and in a really good position on the bum guys he's covering. So I really like what I've seen from him. I want to see more. I want to see him challenge more. But it's all so far so good. Every time I've watched him, it's been very positive, and he has not been tested a lot in the times I've watched him. But I think that's just as much a reflection of what a good job he's doing as it is anything.
Okay, so Ian, as you look at your list on the right, pick any player or players and just feel free to kind of shout them out as to what they did to earn a spot in your top 19.
Yeah, I think, man, it's tough to know who to choose because they're all very. I'm a big fan of all of these guys. I'll start with this. Chandler Rivers, Hezekiah Masses, Preston Hodge, Devin Marshall. That group of 4, they're separated by just 0.23 grading points on my scale. So really, really close together, that entire group of 4. And I think, you look at Rivers and Hodge, those are 2 guys who I project a little bit more to nickel. I still like Rivers a lot. His grade is lowered a bit for me over the course of the season, but I still think, when you look at route intelligence and versatility and ability to manage space and zone and make plays on the ball, despite being a smaller corner, I think he really fits the bill there. Preston Hodge, I like him for a lot of the same reasons that JT said earlier. I think, the athletic profile is really strong and the coverage mobility is really translatable from the slot. He's a fleet-footed guy. He can transition quickly. I'd like the reactive quickness to be a little bit better at times. I think there are slight delays in plant and drive efficiency and response to stimulus at times, but he's a guy who can make plays at the catch point. I think, he's got double-digit pass deflections this year. And DJ McKinney was the guy that we were, expecting to see a leap from on the boundary in Colorado. And then Preston Hodge has really emerged in the slot, and he's shown that he can handle that type of role. I think you'd like him to shore up his tackling form a little bit too, but he's a good player who I think will continue to grow. Devin Marshall, real quick on him. He was a player who I had known of him, but then I watched his game against Florida State, against Deuce Robinson and Micah Danzy, and he was locked down. I mean, I think he had 6 pass deflections, maybe not quite. Maybe it was 3 or 4, but he was swarming in that game, and that was one of the best single games that I've seen from a corner in this class. I don't think he's an elite size adjusted athlete, but I do think he has more than enough speed to at least run with guys like Deuce and Danzy and not give up too much ground and make up in pursuit. He's not the most fluid for his size either, but I think he has a very good foundation with his coverage mobility, and he's chippy, he's physical, he's competitive, and he's a guy who's always going to make you work for it at the catch point. So big fan of that guy. Hezekiah Mass is super fluid at 6'1". And again, is an absolute playmaker at the catch point. He is very, very tough to dislodge. I questioned his vertical speed because against Cooper Barkate was definitely able to stack him a few times, both on the boundary and in the slot. But Masses is a good player too. And then I'll finish with Chris Johnson. Again, coverage mobility, big plus with him. You're looking at a fleet-footed guy who can transition, who can kind of oscillate his tempo over top routes, and very instinctive too. And again, a playmaker at the catch. And despite being a guy who's kind of in the 180s, I think he can engage blocks very well too and support. He is going to the Senior Bowl as well. So if he performs well at that event, I could see him breaking the top 50 and maybe even getting, fringe first round hype if he tests well too. He's a really, really good player. And then Igbinosun is an intriguing, kind of a perplexing player for a lot of people. Watching his game against Michigan, I think there were some highs and some lows, which is kind of what we've become accustomed to seeing from him. But at 6'2", with his length and physicality, right? When it's on, he's shown that he can use targeted physicality with discipline. I think a little bit more this year than last year. Obviously, some penalties still, but I think he has the necessary coverage mobility to say, "Hey, I'm going to use feet first and just ride off of this and use physicality only when I need to." Obviously, he's a guy who's going to go out of his way to kind of engage and kind of dictate and impose his will, and you'd like to see that from the guys having that mentality. Needs a little bit more discipline right now, but I think he's a player who has the athletic potential and the physical temperament that coaches are going to love. Certain coaches are going to love. So I'm still a fan of the upside. I think he has shown growth this year. There's still work to do, but when you look at a guy that big who moves with that much, ease and fluidity, right? It's something that I think you can mold and work into more. So overall, this group of 11 through 20, really fun group of players. And again, they're all still in the mix for my top 100 right now. So all very quality players.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Ian, as you were even going through and you were saying like Domani Jackson is maybe even outside of your top 25, to show the depth of the cornerback class that Domani Jackson might be cornerback 25 or 26. Mm-hmm. To me, that speaks volumes of the depth of the class.
For sure.
So JT, similar question to you. As we're looking at the second half of your top cornerbacks, any players that you want to just shout out and maybe like say why you're going to pound the table for some of these guys?
So the one I want to talk about is Kayin Lee. And I think I like him for all the same reasons that Ian likes D'Angelo Bonds. He's small, but he's super athletic. He's twitched up. I really like all his physical tools. And he's just someone who I think absolutely punches above his weight class. He's super competitive. He does all the things I would want him to do. I don't even notice that he's a smaller corner because he's so feisty and he's so competitive. And, I don't even think feisty does him justice because I'd call Chandler Rivers feisty as a small corner. And that's what makes him good. And that's what makes me love him. But this guy, I can't even think of him as a small corner because he is so competitive. So I'm going to compare guys like Lee and Pons once I see Pons against Ohio State. I think those are going to be two similar profiles, and I really like what I've seen from Lee. And I'm just not there yet with Pons, but I want to be because I really like those kind of small, feisty, twitched up corners. Another one I want to talk about, Jair Hill, and this applies to Domani Jackson as well. But I think he's a year away from potentially being really good. I really like his physical tools. I really like his upside. But he's not there yet. He needs some polishing. He needs some coaching. He needs to be more disciplined. The same with Jackson. And Jackson is a much worse football player right now. He's really a mess, kind of like Ian touched on earlier. but he could be a great football player. I mean, if it all clicks, he could be a top 3 corner in this class. I mean, he's got all the potential in the world. He's just kind of lost right now. And I wouldn't say Hill is lost. I think he's got some polishing to do, but I don't think his upside is as high either. I think it can be a really good upside, and that's why I have him on here. But both those guys are kind of in that same kind of bucket for me. Could be really good, but aren't really good right now. So that's just one of those that goes back to that ice cream thing. How do you feel about those high ceiling, low floor players? If I'm drafting them, I don't like them. But if I'm evaluating them, I love them. I love the idea of taking a swing on a guy and, taking a guy in the 5th or 6th round and, getting your Richard Sherman, getting your star corner who can be a Pro Bowler, who can be an all pro, and both those guys I think have that potential, but they are not there at all right now. Yeah. So, that's just one of those things where that's a personal preference for me. I definitely understand why they're not on Ian's board, especially Jackson, he's got problems. But the upside is just so exciting. So I had to put him on here at some point.
Yeah. And for NFL teams, it's all about, like you said, the opportunity cost. Like, what is the point where we're willing to take a gamble on this guy, especially in such a deep corner class where we might have potential starter caliber players still on the board at the top of round 4? Like, that's the question there. So yeah, it's gonna be tricky. I love seeing Kane Lee that high, and I think I mentioned him shortly, but like he had a pretty high grade for me entering the season. I still have to update his grade, but I'm excited too because I think he could kind of mess with the numbers in my 11 through 20 range too. So great seeing him that high. I'm also a big fan.
Okay. JT, as you're looking at the boards here, do you have any questions for Ian, either on your players or the players that he has?
So obviously my big questions all revolve around Marshall just because I haven't seen him yet. So, that's just one of those things where he's on my radar. I have to get eyes on him. But, I couldn't speak on him. So he's one I look forward to watching. Matthews, I thought, was a tricky one for me because I feel like the more I watch him, the more questions I have with him. And he's just going to require a lot more film study for me because I felt like every time I saw him do something, I saw something else go wrong, in that same game. So I thought he had some ups and downs. I thought, even this Michigan game, I think he had a pretty bad pass interference on a guy he really should have, been able to handle. I mean, Michigan's playmakers are not all that menacing. So he's one who right now he's still more questions than answers with me. So I guess, can you sell me on him? I want more clarity on him. And obviously you feel, like he's floating around your top 100. So what am I getting with Jermaine Matthews? What is this player?
Well, I'll say what you're getting is a player who is unfortunately a little bit inconsistent at this stage. And I think I could say this for both him and Igbenogson. Honestly, I think both of them have been sheltered a little bit by that Ohio State defensive scheme and the front seven, and also with the competition. The front seven has been able to smother a lot of teams that they've faced. And that does make things easier on the corner. This next game against Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper Jr., they're going to have to win one-on-one against these guys. So I'm excited to see what they can do when they're challenged a little bit more. But yeah, Jermaine Matthews, the things that I like about him, I think he passes the athletic threshold. I think he's got enough speed and burst. I think he's very fluid. And he's got great hip sync. That's one thing. Like, he's really good at playing low on his redirection. So I think when you're managing space, it's a lot easier for playing drive. And I like how role versatile he is. He can play the boundary. He can play the slot. He's shown that he can execute blitz looks from the slot too. And he's a pretty sound support player who can engage blocks well. And then especially when he's in zone, I think his playmaking ability shines. When he's in zone coverage and he can read routes, I think he had an interception against Arch Manning in the first week that really showed that, where he was in zone coverage and he was in side saddle on the boundary, and he recognized an inbreaker working underneath, and he broke and undercut it, and boom, there you go. So when he's in zone and off man and he can just float in space, I think that's where he really shines. But to your point, when he eventually has to, because here's the thing with zone coverage, eventually it becomes man. If the quarterback targets your guy, you got to get on him, right? And I think against Michigan, the pass interference, it's tricky because Jermaine Matthews will find the ball in zone coverage and he can make plays on it. But when it's man and he's got a trail guy and he's got to work with his back to the ball, that's where the issues arise. So I think he's definitely a little bit better fit for a lot of off-man and zone schemes than press man, or where you isolate him one-on-one. But as a versatile boundary nickel flex guy, I think there's a ton of potential there. And I do think that, he's still working toward it. I think the consistency can improve. You're going to have to use him in the right roles and the right schematic, framework. But and that's kind of reflected with his valuation too. Fringe day 2, day 3 for me right now. But if you have a good schematic fit for him, I think he has all of the coverage building blocks and he has the support temperament that you want. And at his peak, if he can turn those flashes into really routine down after down plays, then you're looking at a very solid player.
And I feel like a lot of what you just described also describes Igbinosun too. I feel, there's some inconsistency. I feel like he might be a little limited in terms of his scheme. I think he can do a little bit of both, but I think, there's definitely a preference there. And I think what separates him from Matthews is that physicality, which sometimes works against him. But I'm one of those firm believers. I would rather have a player be too physical, too aggressive, and try and coach that out of them than have them be too passive and try and coach that physicality and aggressiveness into that player. So that's kind of what puts Davison above Matthews for me. But I from your description, they sound similar in kind of the shortcomings that I kind of have with them.
I'd say the difference for me with Igbinosun is that Igbinosun's just, his ceiling is a little bit higher in my opinion. He's bigger, he's faster on the vertical plane. I think he's really twitched up for his size too and fluid for his size. And the physicality, it's kind of similar to how I think about quarterbacks now. I'd rather, there was the big dichotomy about, would you rather have a quarterback who's a gunslinger and takes chances or one who protects the ball too much? And ultimately, I like the guys who take the chances because I know they're seeing those chances. I know they're seeing those windows, and more often than not, right? Some guys just like to toss it to the defense, but I would rather you test those tight window throws and kind of push the envelope a little bit, and especially working one-on-ones, right? And if you have to win at the catch point, that's a physical situation. Eventually, it's going to come down to physicality, and I like guys who can match up there. And I think Jermaine Matthews has shown he can in spurts, but Igbinosun to me has a lot more of a physical domineering style, and that counts for something if he can learn to channel it effectively.
Okay, so quick close here. So JT, how high is cornerback on the list of needs for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
I'd say it's a middle tier need. I expect Jamel Dean to walk in the offseason. They just extended Zion McCollum, so even though he is not playing well this year, he's just signed a new 3-year deal that starts next year, so he will be there. And they just drafted Benjamin Morrison in the second round last year. So he's had some ups and downs like all rookies do, but he's looked pretty promising for the most part, I think. So they're going to want a depth guy to replace Dean who they can develop. So I do think they could target that maybe day 3. But I think in the grand scheme of things, there are definitely bigger needs that this team will look to address.
So, JT, could you identify a cornerback, probably not in your top 20, that you think could be a Tampa Bay Buccaneer? Like, can you call your shot right now?
Okay, so thinking out loud, it's going to be someone who is at his best in press man, someone who has good size. So, I know Todd Bowles likes bigger corners. So, someone who is probably at least 6'1", 6'2", 200-ish pounds. Someone who is fast. All of these Bucs corners, Zion McCollum, Jamel Dean, they all run 4.3s, and we didn't get testing times for Benjamin Morrison, but he looked fast on tape too. So going through this group of corners who we have coming out, maybe not Jabril Brawls. Maybe a guy like Devin Moore from Florida. In my notes I have him as more of a zone player.
Yeah, I was gonna say if he runs fast enough, maybe. I don't think he'll run quite fast enough for the Buccaneers.
Yeah, but he's got that size they like. Who is the cornerback from North Carolina that we did early? Thaddeus Dixon. Yeah, 6'1", 185. I wish he was a little bit more physical. Todd Bowles puts a lot of pressure on his corners to tackle well. But I think as a developmental guy, I think he has the athletic profile and the size that they're looking for. So I think Thaddeus Dixon would be the name I'd go with.
Okay. So, Ian, my understanding is Detroit's pretty good at corner, but it's a similar question to you. Do you think Detroit is looking at a day 2 corner, or do you think they look for corners day 3?
Well, I think they have other needs they need to address too, so that's going to make it tricky. But I also think their corner position is I honestly think it's more of a need than people let on. Terrion Arnold has been injured a lot, and when he has been on the field, he's struggled a little bit. I liked him a lot as a prospect coming out, but clearly it hasn't clicked to this point. And for the Lions, do you give him another year to try and figure things out, or do you try and get insurance in the middle rounds? And I would at least try and target a guy in the middle rounds. DJ Reed, when he's been healthy, has been good. They've had to rely on kind of journeyman corners a lot this year because of the injuries, like Rock Yassin, Amik Robertson, and Ennis Rakestraw, who they drafted in round 2 the same year as Arnold. He's barely played. So I think they could be looking at one in the middle rounds. I would probably be looking at a guy, again, that's really good in press man and man coverage, because they like to get in guys' grills. They like to set the tone with physicality. And, you think of Amik Robertson, DJ Reed. These are guys who can match and gather and run with guys, make plays at the catch point in spite of their size. So I honestly, when I think of, D'Angelo Pons, right, that's kind of the Lions. I feel like opposite Terrion Arnold, that would be an ideal fit. Have a small, feisty guy who can run with anybody and make plays at the catch point. That makes a lot of sense to me. But there's other guys farther down the board too. I think that if he were to come out, again, I don't think he's going to. I think he could use another year. But Evan Johnson from BYU, who we talked about, another smaller but really fast and has some feistiness to him. That type of player. But I do think the Lions should probably try and target it in the middle rounds if they can. But I know they're going to have a lot of needs to address. Edge rusher being another big one in the early rounds potentially. So we'll see. It'll be a balance for them though.
And the reason why I ask is that, so on average, 33 corners get drafted every year. There's 32 teams. That means on average, every team is drafting one. The only question is it like, do you need a starter? So you're looking at day 1 or day 2, or do you need somebody to fill depth at the back of the roster? Mm-hmm. In addition to that, Joe Marino has been pointing out on the Locked On Scouting podcast frequently that cornerback is the most frequently injured position in the league. So more corners miss time with injuries than any other position. So my opinion is you keep restocking the shelf every year. That's the best way to build your roster, is to make sure you have young corners that can come in and fill in. So I am definitely curious. Like, Buffalo invested 3 picks in defensive backs last year. I really hope that they don't go over at corner this year, but I would be curious if they would be looking at somebody to play slot, as there's been some regression with Teron Johnson.
I know we didn't cover him in a corner pod, but like Kamari Ramsey from USC would be a great fit there too. But yeah.
So we did a slot podcast last night. Ramsey was one of the players that came up, but we had linebackers, safeties, and corners
Oof,
all in one podcast. It's Can You Play the Slot?
that
Kind of
sounds
thing.
fun.
So we were talking about Harold Perkins, Kyle Lewis, with Traydon Stukes and Preston Hodge, and a lot of the other players that you have on your board here. I have a question. Did we do Keontae Scott from Auburn?
He's Miami, right?
Or excuse me, Miami now. He was Auburn last year. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't.
Keontae,
The name doesn't.
did we
sound
evaluate him as a
familiar.
corner?
I don't think we did. I watched a little bit of him the other day, and I think he's got good foot speed from off man and zone. He's physical. Not sure if he's an elite athlete. He'd probably just off of my. I still need to watch more. I still need to get a firmer grasp. He'd probably be in the early to mid day 3 range for me. But I think a really physical, again, feisty nickel who's got good depth discipline, good functional mobility, and I think he could end up being a solid starter. Because I mean, you look at the corner position. I mean, you mentioned it, like it's the most injured, and then I think corner and safety. You don't always need to be an elite testing athlete to have a role in the league. Like I look at Quentin Lake with the Los Angeles Rams. He was not an elite tester. He was, I think, undrafted or drafted late, and he's become a really solid starter. If you can manage depth, if you can play physical and technically sound, you can have a place. And I think Keontae Scott could kind of fall into that bucket where he's going to get drafted in round 4, round 5, and go on to be a really solid player.
Yeah, JT, did we do Keontae Scott on a week that Ian wasn't here?
I don't think so.
No,
I don't
okay.
think I see him.
So
in
I
my,
think the
my notes
other,
here.
right, there were 2 corner podcasts. I think he made it onto the list for the other group and not you guys. So mistake from the producer.
It's all good. It's all good.
Yep. But JT, do you want to let everybody watching know about your Buccaneers content and your website?
Sure. So all my written work is at bucksreport.com, obviously covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We have turned the season around. We are back winning the South on top. We're never going to die. And we have a podcast I do with a fellow draft professor. That is the Creamsicle Chronicle podcast with Andrew Harbaugh. That typically is going to go either Tuesdays or Wednesdays, depending on how our week flows. And then I am here Friday nights on Draft Professors.
Ian.
Yep. So you can follow me at IC_draft on X, formerly Twitter. Any draft questions you have, feel free to hit me up. I write and analyze the draft for PFSN, Pro Football and Sports Network. We have a mock draft simulator. Hey, Brian, what's up, bro? Good to see Brian here. But yeah, we have a mock draft simulator that we're updating regularly. And then also just, updating my grading, the composite board, some big updates to it today. I'm really excited to keep kind of developing that. So we're still in the thick of it. We're still got a long way to go, but as always, happy to chop it up with you guys.
Well, I'm thrilled to have both of you here. So we just went through 7 or 8 straight weeks of cornerbacks. So I appreciate you guys tolerating me and the players I'm throwing at you. I know that there were some UDFAs in there. So we sorted through 48 corners, and today we got like top 20s. So that was pretty cool. I want to give a plug to the Draft Professor Simulator. It's interactive. And what that means is that if Ian goes in and does a mock draft for the Lions, and then JT goes in and does a mock draft for the Buccaneers, if I come in and I do a mock draft for Buffalo, there's a really good chance that the players that Ian took for the Lions will be drafted by the Lions during the mock, and the players that JT took for the Buccaneers would be drafted by the Buccaneers when I did my Bills mock. As long as the players are still there, that tends to be how the algorithm works. So there are some podcasts on how that worked. I actually did a couple of them this morning. But if you have any questions on how the simulator works, it's really not that complicated, but I'm happy to talk about it because, I've just spent so much time designing it. So, but I want to, again, say thank you to JT, thank you to Ian, for the 110 people at the Draft Professor. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody, and we will see you on a podcast again tomorrow.